Welcome to another Human Read audiobook by the United Marxist Pact Discord server, link below in the description. In this series, we continue our investigation into the initial construction, the organizational structure, and the principles and tactics of the form of worker organization capable of seizing political power and establishing the revolutionary proletarian dictatorship and communality, which can in turn produce the communist mode of production through the shared class interests of the workers of the entire world. Our goal is to compile, analyze, and elaborate on what all of these texts have to say about this, and at the end have a strong understanding of the exact scientific process of it, particularly in general terms. At the end of our readings as a whole, we will try to put it all together and present it as a coherent whole in an educational video with associated notations. Today's reading will be the second part of this reading section, the notes on the thesis of organization. Actually, I just realized that last one is not part of a large reading. Okay, so this is the first part in a three-part section. This is the 1965 International Communist Party's notes for the theses on questions of organization. We have a pre-written textual analysis on terms of the aforementioned topics, which is also posted in the pinned comment if you prefer to read in text, or follow the link in the description to a read-only version of my Google Docs notes. This will summarize the content of the text, but is no replacement for the actual reading itself for the sake of understanding the context and full content of the piece. In addition, in the reading I supply my own commentary, critiques, additions, etc., which may be helpful for understanding some particularities. I do not write down things that are repetitious or I feel are completely inapplicable for whatever reason. So, let's get right into it. The organizational structure of the party is at all times in line with its will, what it is aiming for, which is prefigured, and its possible actions, the acts it can take at any given time, which is determined by subjective and objective conditions, externally and internally. The organizational structure should only ever produce the end result of what is the will, the aim of the party, fitting to whatever circumstances is necessary to produce that result. For example, the aim of the International is for the workers of any country to obtain the maximum possible aid from the organized workers from all other countries, allowing the international working class to struggle against capital on international terrain. Any organizational form or action that hinders that aim must be abandoned. To this end, democracy should not be a principle, and electoral democracy within the party hinders the development of the party. Rather, we must recognize the class character of the actions being taken, and of the organizational form that we are utilizing at all times, and determine if it prefigures communist society and produces the results we desire. Since popular electoralism is not always able to achieve this, it cannot always be employed. With democratic centralism, the aim is to synthesize centralization and proletarian democracy, which requires permanent common activity derived from shared class role throughout the party, which produces a sort of necessity for laborism and workerism. However, centralization is a certainty needed, and hence we can make universal determinations of organizational structure based on this knowledge. For example, the organs that have activity of the party, such as the parliamentary groups, must be at all times subordinated to the party center. In addition, since we have aims of maximizing the class character of actions being taken, we can also layer organs of the party in terms of importance and closeness to the center based on their revolutionary character, starting with the party first, the worker council dominated by a party second, and a union third as examples. The party's principles adapt to its conditions within limits that are determined by a class struggle which, for instance, shows that the party's organizational form itself is a necessity. But the particulars of its internal structures are fluid, with its activity evolving at different stages. The revolutionary movement is directed by the party, an aim which determines the products that the organization must produce. Formation, organization, and education of a leading party. Ultimate capacity to act as the general staff of the revolutionary movement. To this end, the party needs to be the central organ of communist activity, under a powerful leadership that is organized and dynamic, not bureaucratic. In order to carry out this dynamic organized action, centralization and discipline is necessary rather than anarchism, requiring practical action assisted by organizational coding. Consultative or elective mechanisms based on register count to votes does not necessarily produce and so should be generally abandoned. And I will now begin the full audiobook reading. This will explain the full text as being summarized here in such a way that you'll understand what and why was extracted from it. I hope that you enjoy the full reading. This is the International Communist Party's notes for the theses on the question of organization in the Il Programma Comunista number 22, November 1964. 1. The expression of democratic centralism is a type of organization for the communist parties to which the left oppose the formula of organic centralism. Can be found, first of all, in the theses presented by Zinoviev at the Second Congress of the Role of the Communist Party in the Proletarian Revolution, and illustrated by Zinoviev's speech at the second session held at the Kremlin on July 23, 1920. The central part of the theses and the speech received full support from the communist left, and still have it today, because they contain an resolute Marxist criticism of all those currents that devalue the function of the political class party and want to replace it with the most diverse forms: trade unions, workers' councils, factory committees, etc., etc. This current was strongly represented at the Second Congress, especially by the English, Americans, Dutch, and also by the French syndicalists and even Spanish anarchists. The Italian left communist left wish to differentiate itself immediately from these currents which, besides not understanding the theses on the party, also put up with the difficulty with those on centralization and strict discipline, vigorously affirmed then by Zinoviev. When these groups agreed to the theses of the Italian left about parliamentarism, the Speaker of the left asked not to vote for his theses those who are not on the narrow Marxist ground, and that is why of 7 votes against parliamentary participation, only 3 of these were for the theses of the Italian left: Belgium, Denmark, Switzerland, and the Italian vote being consultative. This is probably one of the most stupid things I have ever heard in my life. Don't vote for me unless you're a true communist. Don't vote for my true communist program unless you're a true communist yourself. Okay. I'm at a complete loss, but okay. This isn't even a thing of pragmatics. This is just a thing of, okay, I'm just gonna move on. Just move on. 2. The above formula appears in point 14 of the Zinoviev Theses and is worded as follows, quote, "The Communist Party must be organized on the basis of democratic centralism. The main principles of democratic centralism are that higher bodies are elected by lower bodies, all directives of higher bodies are absolutely binding on subordinate bodies, and a powerful party center exists whose authority between congresses is unquestioned by all the leaders of the party." End quote. These theses do not go into more detail, and with regard to the concept of subordination of the periphery to the center, the left had no reason not to accept them. The doubt arose about the way in which the committees were designated from the periphery to the center, about the use of an electoral mechanism of vote counting, to which the democratic adjective opposite to the noun centralism. Okay, they don't mean to say democratic is an antonym for centralism. They mean democratic put next to centralism. Okay, as well as a brief hint that follows immediately afterwards, clear refer. Okay. 3. The thought of the Third International at its beginning and of its great theorists was not of total homage to the mechanism of election by vote, an evident imitation of the mechanism boasted as eternity and ideal by the bourgeois Democrats. Results from the very text of the statute of the International as it was adopted at the same Second Congress. This statute mentions, first of all, Some paragraphs of the statute of the First International Workers' Association, adopted at the proposal of Marx in London in 1864. It is well known that this statute introduces the formula of political party, without which the proletariat cannot act as a class, distinct from all other political parties and opposed to them. More precisely, this precise formula is not found in the statutes voted in 1864, but in the more detailed ones adopted at the Conferences of London in September 1871 and The Hague in September 1872. The Moscow Statute recalls how the Second International, founded in 1889 in Paris, undertook to continue the work of the first, but perished in 1914 because it betrayed that commitment. 4. In the new statute, it is repeated that the organization must be strongly centralized. It follows a much better formula than that of democratic centralism. Quote, the organization of the Communist International is directed towards securing for the workers of every country the possibility, at any given moment, of obtaining the maximum of aid from the organized workers of other countries. End quote. According to the Article 1, the aim of the International is the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat and International Republic of Soviets, as to say, worker councils. In Article 4, the supreme instance of the International is the World Congress of all parties and affiliated organizations. In order not to misunderstand the double term of parties and organizations, it is good to quote the text of the previous Article 3. Quote, all the parties and organizations comprising the International bear the name of the Communist Party of the particular country, section of the Communist International, end quote. Returning to the Congress, the number of deliberative votes attributed to each party does not depend on the number of its members, as a pure electoral mechanism would have, but, quote, will be fixed by a special decision of the Congress, end quote. It is true that efforts will be made to establish as soon as possible rules of representation that, quote, are based on the actual number of members of each organization, end quote. But it's immediately said that, quote, and taking into account the real influence of the party, end quote. The purpose of these quotations is to show that never before, in the classical times of the Moscow International, was the democratic numerical criterion or the foolish half plus one formula taken as a myth. In Article 8, it is said that the Congress fixes the seat of the Executive Committee. One could not think then of any other place than Moscow. The Communist Party of the chosen country has at least 5 representatives in the executive with the deliberative vote. In addition to these, each of the 12 most important parties is entitled to 1 representative with 1 vote. It is the World Congress that sets the list of these 12 parties. The others can delegate 1 representative with a consultative vote to the Executive Committee. Among other regulations, the one in Article 13, has a certain meaning, according to which the different affiliated parties must communicate with each other through the international executive, and, in case of absolute urgency, inform it of their steps. There are, however, different organizational cornerstones which detach themselves from the formal egalitarian and numerical principle, the traditional elective representations introduced by the modern bourgeoisie, and draw original physiognomy in perfect contrast to those of the popular democracies, quote unquote, from the classical principle of the First International and the Manifesto of the Communists of 1848, according to which the illusory entity of the people is broken down in favor of the opposite social class. All right, so let's see. We're going to take this, and we're going to skip down and take this, I think. Yes. The other part is just saying, hey, they didn't follow their own program. Also, their program is bad, but we also said it was good. Okay. Maybe it was bad because they didn't follow their own program according to the way they conceptualize the way that people meant the program. Perhaps. Anyway. So the aim of the international, however is structured, basically, I'll rewrite this later, but it's essentially the aim of the international comes forth first, in a certain sense, and then after the aim is understood, then we can talk about the organizational structure of it, which should produce whatever the aim is. The aim of the international is to make it so any country's workers can obtain the maximum aid of the organized workers of all the other countries sent to them in their struggle, in order to create a world socialist revolution. We should also avoid falling conceptions of popular electoralism and rather recognize the class character of the people who we are seeking solidarity with. We're not wanting to make it so, um, members of the bourgeoisie can vote in our can vote and spend money and pushing forward candidates and so on and so forth within our internal uh, organizational structure that completely defeats the purpose. Continuing. 5. Returning to Zenobie's theses on the role of the party, they contain many points that in later years the left will remain alone to defend. One is that the dictatorship of the Communist Party, of course, yeah, is the only historical way to exist for the dictatorship of the proletarian class. Again, this dictatorship of the party is something that has no grounding in Marx whatsoever, and it frankly goes completely against him on many levels. I've been through the texts, and I have said all I'm going to say about this already. Continuing. In other points, it is repeated that all the organs of activity of the party, for example, the parliamentary group, must depend on the party center. The Philistine division of the workers' movement into three equivalent forms, party, unions, cooperatives, is denied in Theses 8, and a new formula is affirmed in order of importance. First the party, second the Soviet, third the unions. Next, it is clearly stated that also the Soviet, if it is not dominated by the Communist Party, loses the character of historical form of the dictatorship of the proletariat and of revolutionary force. A formula of the German Communist Workers' Party, KPD, which declared, quote, the party must also adapt more and more to the Soviet idea and proletarianize itself, end quote, is deplored. I don't actually understand the issue with the question of proletarianizing the party. It's probably a rejection of workerism as they perceive it. Again, I think that they're right, kind of, but at the same time, they also go as far as to say that leadership positions can and should be filled by bourgeoisie, right? Because, once you enter into the party, then you are an actual member of the proletariat. They deny the proletarian status of people who are not in the party, in fact. So, in a certain sense, I don't even know what they're complaining about here unless they're complaining about workerism. Um, anyway, the need for the party to centralize the workers' councils, which only emerge out of the failures of the economic struggle of unions into a political military format, also is kind of weird to me. The worker council is unequivocally the most developed form of economic struggle within these things. So again, I'm not too clear. And to give some understanding of the character of worker unions, or sorry, worker councils, we'll get to these readings later. But to put things simply, essentially what happens is worker unions fail and they get crushed. So what happens? Well, you need leadership. So leaders arise, but they arise in secret. And you need black cat strikes. They need to be they need to be planned for. They need to have people who are in secret, and they need to essentially be able to call for militant union action at any given time and just call for a strike that's illegal. And this is where the worker councils come in. This is a formalized, systematized, illegal sect of a union that is taking leadership of it. It doesn't involve in democracy or anything like that. We talked about this with Gorder's letter. We'll talk about more when we eventually read some Matic, and we might open up some Pacoac. I don't know. Spontaneity, not even once. But anyway, so uh, frankly, I'm not too clear on the issue of adopting and bringing in closer and closer these militant unions that are strictly illegal form of struggle, because that's what they are. Okay, the powerful thesis proposed by Zinoviev is this, quote, we see in this nothing but an insinuating expression of the idea that the Communist Party should merge into the Soviets and that the Soviets can replace it. A deeply erroneous and reactionary idea. Okay. There's in the thesis the point 9 that the party will necessarily not only before and during the conquest of power, but also after that. All right. Well, we'll take this, but I'm just gonna write down some specific things I think are of import. All right. So the organs of activity of the party, such as the parliamentary groups, which is external to the party, depends wholly on the party center. Reminder: with this format, essentially you have what amount to external organs which answer to the party but aren't a part of it, so that they don't, quote unquote, corrupt it. And one of these things is, for example, the agrarian groups, the parliamentary group, which does in fact engage in bourgeois electoralism, legal struggle, and so on and so forth. But these really aren't part of the party. They take orders from it, but that's it. They don't get say in internal party proceedings. Um, their their engagement might be membership, but that's it. Continuing, the organs are layered in importance. The party comes first, the worker council second, which is dominated by the party, and the union third. And again, these things are outside of the party, they're not internal to it. Okay, continuing. There's all the thesis in point 9 that the party will be necessary not. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so 6. Oh, right. This is that section where they're saying, oh, yes, the party will still be doing its thing even after politics are gone. Totally. Absolutely. Um, on the basis of some imagined, what happened to the aliens or something. I don't remember what exactly that was, but it was in Kamat. Anyway. 6. The question of organization was dealt with in an explicit way at the Third Congress in June 1921 by a live and directly present Lenin. The title is, quote, The Organizational Structure of the Communist Parties, the Methods and Content of Their Work, Theses. Did we go through that? 1921. I do not believe that we went through that, but I should absolutely add it. So or maybe I did. Not sure. But is this Lenin? It might be Lenin. I'm not sure. Oh, hold on. Published into the masses. Huh. Okay. Anyway, we're just gonna continue. Um, The first paragraph deals with the generalities and establishes that the question of organization cannot be regulated by an immutable principle, but must adapt to the conditions and aims of the party's activities. During the phase of the revolutionary class struggle and during the period of further transition towards the realization of socialism, the early stages of communist society. The different conditions from country to country must be considered, but within certain limits. Quote, the limit, everyone has forgotten it today, um, depends on the similarity of the conditions of the proletarian struggle in the different countries and the different phases of the proletarian revolution, which constitutes, above all, a fact of essential importance for the communist movement. It is this similarity that gives the common basis for the organization of the communist parties in all countries. It is on this basis that we must develop the organization of the communist parties and not tend towards the foundation of some new model party in place of what already exists or pursue a formula of absolutely correct organization and ideal statutes. End quote. The theses state that the revolutionary movement must have a direction. Quote, the organization of the communist parties is the organization of the communist leadership in proletarian revolution, end quote. This other definition of the organizational task that imposes itself on us all is given, quote, formation, organization, and education of a pure, this term that was all the rage back then, and truly leading communist party to truly lead the proletarian revolutionary movement. Okay. We'll add this entire section. So the party's principles adapt to their conditions within limits that are determined by the class struggle, which is across the board. Even if one country has this particular condition and another country has this particular condition, it's all proletarian bourgeois. It's all class struggle, and these class struggles are married by that similar character of proletarianization and so on and so forth. This shows that the party organizational form itself is necessary, but the particulars of its internal structure are fluid. Party's activity evolves at different stages, and the revolutionary movement is directed by the Communist Party, an aim which determines the products that the organization must produce. Remember, whatever organizational form that you have, it needs to produce something. What is it producing? That's determined by historical knowledge and experience and stuff like that. And what we have found is that we need to form a general staff, right? One that can lead the working class. You need organization, education, and finally, they need to be able to convert into a military organization to be able to lead, finally, the working class to victory. If you don't have those things, then you don't have a functional party. You probably just have a group of some sort. And yeah, so these are the things that, whatever the format that you have, whatever the organizational structure you have, these are the things that need to be produced out of it. Continuing. 7. Part 2 of the theses, we believe, due to Lenin, is directly entitled Democratic Centralism. Thesis 6 defines it as follows, quote, democratic centralism in the organization of the Communist Party must be a true synthesis, a fusion, of centralization and proletarian democracy. This fusion can be achieved only by permanent common activity, by an equally common and permanent struggle of the party as a whole. End quote. The following steps already show what could be the dangers of the false interpretation of the formulas of democratic centralism and proletarian democracy. For example, the centralization of the Communist Party must not be formal or mechanical. Quote, it must be a centralization of communist activity, that is, the formation of a powerful leadership ready to attack and at the same time capable of adaptation. A formal or mechanical centralization would only be the centralization of power in the hands of a bureaucracy with the aim of dominating the other members of the party or the masses of the revolutionary proletariat outside the party. End quote. Is this from the same text? Or is this from a different text? Anyway, the theses deny the false version that our opponents give of our centralism. Subsequently, a dualism of the old workers' movement, which has the same nature as that in the organization of the bourgeoisie state. For example, the dualism between the bureaucracy and the people, between active officials and the passive mass, is deplored as a grave flaw. Unfortunately, the workers' movement inherits a certain sense from the bourgeois environment, these tendencies towards formalism and dualism, which the Communist Party must radically overcome. The next step, which highlights the two opposite dangers and two opposite excesses, anarchism and bureaucratism, explains in what sense the communist this implies that anarchism lacks bureaucratism and is the opposite of it, but that's obviously not true. So this is automatically an incorrect analysis, right? Um, and this whole middle way nonsense. No. Anyway, quote, a purely formal democracy in the party cannot avoid either bureaucratic or anarchist tendencies because it is precisely on the basis of this democracy that anarchy and bureaucratism in the workers' movement were able to develop. That is why centralization, that is, the effort to achieve a strong direction, cannot succeed if it is attempted in the field of formal democracy. Okay. All the theses in the part, I mean, I understand what they're saying. Um, as usual, their conclusion is at least approaching correct, but their reasoning is dog shit, right? You know, what they're ultimately saying is that um, centralization towards a particular direction is what we want to do. And, if we're utilizing some form of electoral democracy, it will not always work out. And so we can't hold it as a principle. Sometimes different things require different structures in order to achieve this centralization, right? Sure, absolutely. That's entirely correct. But again, they've got this, oh, hey, two either bureaucratic or anarchist tendencies. And, we kind of want to be in the middle, but, so we don't do either. And it's like, anarchism isn't the opposite of bureaucracy. So you're automatically making a failure of judgment here. You want to avoid bureaucracy, but at the same time, you also want to avoid anarchism. Cool. Just say that. You don't need to go in and do all this talking shit. Oh, they're also doing a quote, which actually the quote says precisely what I was saying. It's just their analysis of it is dog shit. Anyway, all the theses in the parts following the second are based on the description of communist work, propaganda, and agitation, and of political struggles, pointing out that the solution is found in practical action and not in organizational coding. Practical action is determined by organizational coding. You cannot engage in practical action in a consistent way without organization. Therefore, the organization which emerges side by side with the practical action. These are in a dialectical relation, they are inseparable. So, the solution is found in practical action and organizational coding. Chop this shit out. The connection of legal work with illegal work is particularly illustrated. All right. So we're going to grab this. And again, these are just quotes more or less. And we're going to grab this because I don't even care to get this top part. And it sounds like they're just doing a quibble about the term used. Okay. All right. So the aim is to synthesize centralization and proletarian democracy, which requires permanent common activity derived from shared struggles throughout the party. So essentially, what's being said here is, hey, because we're all members of the proletariat and because we all have shared class interests, that means that the party can really act as a synthesis of centralization as the common goal of pushing forward, and democracy. Because if everybody in the party is a member of the proletariat, then everybody will have shared class interest, struggle, and common activity, right? Common conceptions. And from this, you can see the emergence of a workerist conception. If you let pay bourgeois into the party, then they will vote against the interests of the proletariat. There remains the question of how important that is, if you've got over 50% proletarians. And this is where the whole conception of the need for majority votes comes into play, which is the principal thing that's being critiqued here under the guise, it's not a guise, at least not at this point, but back then it was a guise of critiquing democracy as a whole. Now it's become, we are actually critiquing democracy as collective decision making as a whole. Instead of, hey, we're critiquing electoral majority plus one, or half plus one democracy, which is a fair thing to criticize in my view. But the thing is, democracy isn't, and note that this specifies proletarian democracy as opposed to bourgeois democracy or the democracy of the ancient Athenians and whatnot, or the real democracy that comes after class society, which is impossible during class society because the state of the conception of the state necessarily means that there's violent force involved, and that precludes actual democracy, actual rule of the people. It's instead rule of a particular class. Proletarian democracy is the democratic rule of the proletarian class. Within and inside a party, it's a democratic rule of the proletariat within the party. Anyway, so democracy is really in many ways a tactic more than anything else. It's a way of achieving common conceptions. It's a way of propagating ideas. It's a way of generating common assent, and so on and so forth. So on and so forth. Um, yeah. Continuing, the party needs to be the central organ of communist activity under a powerful leadership that is organized and dynamic, not bureaucratic. In order to carry out this dynamic, organized action, centralization is necessary rather than anarchism. Practical action assisted, I'm making this change because it's correct. This conception is stupid. It's more refusal of organization, and it's not something that is actually said by this quote. Practical action assisted by organizational coding is necessary to achieve this dynamism, develop leadership, and strengthen centralization. Again, practical action is determined by organizational coding. You cannot engage in practical action without this organizational coding. You cannot determine what kind of organization you need until you start taking practical action. This is a thing that happens at the same time. It's in a dialectical, integral relation with one another. And this is known by everybody. Okay, continuing. 8. A very important point is in Thesis 12, which shows that in Lenin's time, no thought at all was given to the cellular organizational formula. Quote, I don't know what this cellular organization is, but quote, communist nuclei are groups where daily communists work in factories and workshops, trade unions, proletarian associations, military units, etc. Whenever there are some members or candidates of the Communist Party, Russian meant by candidates the comrades admitted for what could be said to be a trial period into the party before their final acceptance as its members. End quote. The following, with the many recommendations it contains, explains that each group is a long articulation driven by the central force of the party, but the party is not considered as an integral of groups or nuclei. I think they mean the mathematical integral, not like the party is not integral for groups or nuclei. It's not necessary. Okay. This question was the basis of the left's opposition to the formula of organization by cells, which was debated in later congresses and through which the Communist International fell into the bureaucratic defects of the Second International, deforming both dialectical sides of democratic centralism as Lenin saw it. I don't know what these cellular organizations are, I'm afraid. So I can't say anything on this. But I will take this and ask on the server about it. Okay. 9. Going back in history is appropriate to deal with a point on which the opportunists had made one of their infinite deformations of original Marxism. Again, you guys are one to talk, Mister. The Paris Commune was a dictatorship of the proletariat because it wasn't democratic. Literally the exact fucking opposite of what Marx said. Gosh. That is, that the first international founded by Marx is organized on membership country by country, or even place by place of existing workers' organization or workers' union. So it's internationally repeat the type of the English Labour Party, which was a kind of confederation of trade unions with an economic character. The opposite is true, and not only since 1864, but since a manifesto of 1848. The revolutionary organization of the national or international proletariat is a political party. This does not necessarily, cancel this out, but okay. The Communist Manifesto seems to literally say that every existing worker party is already part of the International Proletarian Party, that is, of the Communist Party that launches its manifesto to the world. However, the historical sense according to which the doctrine is immutable, but the formal organization undergoes a series of evolution, helps us to understand that in a time of full bourgeois regime and full democracy, in force in England and France, every workers' party is in itself revolutionary because, according to the dominant bourgeois ideology and constitution, parties are defined according to opinions professed and confessed by the individual who adheres to them. It would be illegal and to be repressed by the police if a party declared to be based on the economic class to which all its members must belong. Huh? Okay, I won't say that's wrong because, this is 1848. I don't know the laws back then. Basically, it sounds like they're saying that it would be illegal to bar entry to people for a party to bar entry to people who are not of their of the proletarian class. I don't know. In this phase, the economic and trade union struggle is automatically a political struggle. But this should not be understood according to democratic and parliamentary philosophism, but according to instinct, father of every true revolutionary theory, which pushed the armed proletarians of line to the historical cry, quote, live by working or die by fighting, end quote. When armed struggle is needed to organize and to strike, the distinction between economic and political organization is no concern for anyone. When, on the other hand, we refer to a stage that the proletarian movement crosses, let's say in 1870 or 1964, one has the right, with the same consistency to the general Marxist theory, invariant, through much more of a century, to condemn as anti-Marxist, opportunist, and counter-revolutionary all forms of organization that speak of quote-unquote workers' party, labor party, or party that gathers workers' unions or even factory councils as its adherents. Okay. 10. I don't know enough about. I don't know enough about the distinction or the character of a workers' party. I'm aware of the Labour Party, like in the UK, right? And that is absolutely a reactionary shitbag of a party. Um, there's also one in Australia and a couple of other places. These things are, at the very best, sucked in. More often than not, they are um, highly reactionary. Anyway, 10. Taking up now the statute of the First International as it was voted after the famous meeting in London in 1864, we remind of, first of all, that was drafted in its entirety in place of a text prepared by popular Democrats, even of the Mazzini School by Karl Marx, who tells its history in his letter to Engels of November 4th, 1864. The meeting at Martin's Hall was held on September 28th. Marx recounts how in his text, recounts how his text, both for the statutes of the new international and for its famous inaugural address, replaced the previous projects and accepted by meeting delegate subcommittee. The letter says verbatim, quote, on the pretext that all factual material was included in this address and that we ought not repeat the same things 3 times over, I altered the whole preamble, threw out the Declaration of Principles, and finally replaced the 40 rules by 10. Insofar as an international politics occurred in the address, I speak of countries, not of nationalities, and denounce Russia, not the minorities gentium. What is this? Google Translate. Come on, Marx. Minor nations. Okay. This short passage is a colossal synthesis of the national theses of the communists of Lenin's time. My proposals have all been accepted by a subcommittee, but I was obliged to insert 2 phrases about duty and right into the preamble to the rules, and also about truth, morality, and justice. But these are placed in such a way that they can do no harm. End quote. For almost a century, okay. For almost a century, asshole commentators have been commenting on this recognition of law and morality, writing, Mazzini first of them, various nonsense without understanding that, as a giant of dialectics, Karl Marx had named the truth only by telling a big lie, in order to destroy the enemies of the revolution. If this is Leninist shrewdness, we accept it. Basically, political, clever politics, right? Regarding the preamble eliminated by Marx, it is worth quoting a few more words from a historical letter. Quote, Major Wolff has handed in the rules of the Italian Workers' Associations, which possess a central organization but, as later transpired, are essentially mutual benefit associations, to be used for the new association. I saw the stuff later. It was evidently a concoction of Mazzini's, so you already know the spirit and phraseology in which the real question, the labor question, was dealt with. Also how nationalities were shoved in. In addition, an old Owenite, Weston, Owenite as in the utopian socialist, had drawn up a program of indescribable breadth and extreme confusion, end quote. Further on, Marx recounts that, speaking at the subcommittee, quote, I was really alarmed when I heard the worthy Lelubez read out an appallingly wordy, badly written, and quite raw preamble, pretending to be a declaration of principles in which Mazzini could be detected everywhere. The whole coated over with the vaguest scrapes of French socialism, end quote. This is the stuff that Marx managed to screw up by replacing his text, in which he apologizes for having to introduce meaningless words such as duty, law, truth, etc. 11. It is said, that said, okay, so basically this entire section is essentially going in and trying to say, hey, Marx didn't intend to add these things, but was forced to by the politics of the time and did the best that he could within that. Okay. 11. That said, the text of the statutes might be cited. The question of the relationship between economic and politics is formulated as in a manifesto with strict and rigorous adherence to the doctrine of historical materialism. Quote, the economic dependence of the worker on the holders of the means of indispensable to work, that is, of the sources of life, is the primary cause of all political, moral, and material slavery. Consequently, the economic emancipation of workers is a great goal to which every movement must be subordinated as a means. End quote. Of what follows, we cite only a few passages. Quote, this international association, like all societies and individuals who adhere to it, end quote, a passage followed by the famous useless words, and which is enough to confirm that adherence is not only of societies, but also of individuals. Then the text of Article 10 is interesting. Quote, though united by a fraternal bond of solidarity and cooperation, worker societies will continue to exist on their own particular foundations. End quote. In subsequent Congresses, the fundamental statutes had new formulations which he believed were all controlled by the intervention of Marx and other members of the genuine Communist League, such as S.C. Ecarius, Odger, and others. The formulas became increasingly clear and led to a classic concept of a revolutionary communist political party according to our doctrine. Our party is a class and not a confessional party like the parties of electoral democracy, where essentially somebody goes up and says, this is what I believe, and then votes based on that, and that's it. In which the second term is obviously, although Marx's first text contains the expression, quote, without distinction of race, beliefs, nationality, end quote, which the second term is obviously a superfetation. Huh. Wow. Okay. Sure. All right. But the party does not allow collective affiliations, but only individual ones, which commit to adhere to the integral doctrine of the party and exclude the acceptance of antithetical religious, philosophical, and political doctrines. Okay. I don't think that needs to be written down. 12. When the Communists left, developed its criticism of the Third International's deviation from the problems of tactics. It also made a critique of the criteria of organization. The following up of historical facts has shown that these deviations have fatally led to the abandonment of programmatic and theoretical basic positions. This thesis of the Communist left was well summarized in the request that we no longer speak of democratic centralism, but of organic centralism. A clear development of this thesis made in 1922 to 26, which the clear development, sure, okay, bro. Yeah, let's see if they can even explain what it is. Which, because they certainly never seem to deign to. Which therefore does not appear only today, is that must be ended with the historically unavoidable use made in the past, in a mechanical sense, of decisions by electoral votes and by counting the partisans of one opinion or another. This theoretical criticism starts from having considered Zinnovie's central thesis to Dahl. Quote, the party is a part of the working class, end quote. This thesis is evidently unsatisfactory, and it would not be fair to think that is so only for reasons of strict doctrinarism, and that was admissible in the same sense in which Karl Marx allowed himself, grinning inwardly without being discovered to speak of morality and justice. As a matter of fact, our criticism was developed since those years and cannot be judged as theoretical prudery because we have a formidable series of real subsequent. Okay, just fucking say it. This kind of shit is just intellectual masturbation. I just want to say it's not fun to read. It's intellectual masturbation saying, look how smart we are. Oh yeah. Fucking quit it. Just say what you're gonna say. Nobody needs to hear this. God damn. Sorry. We pointed out to Zinoviev that his formula underlying historically correct and very important theses was too timid and reticent because it was only quantitative, whereas the classical theses of the Manifesto and the First International are already decidedly qualitative. That the party is only a part of the working class explains that there are in fact workers inside the party and workers outside the party, and that is not enough to be economically and socially workers to become members of the party, but is not enough at all to lead to the result which Zinoviev himself enunciates of distinguishing the two notions, class and party. Nor was it only a matter of making a, quote, sharp distinction, Thesis 3, as Zinoviev says, but to arrive at the function, the task of the historical dynamic of the Communist Party in right relationship with the function and the dynamic of the proletarian class. As we have shown, it was already an irreplaceable content of the Communist doctrine in the manifesto and the statutes of the First International that when the party forms introduce a new presentation of the proletarian class is born, because then the proletariat presents itself and acts as a fighting class against the others when it manages to shape itself into a political party. Stopping at the purely quantitative distinction, almost as if the party were the content of a circle drawn within a wider field of the proletarian class, it was perhaps possible to avoid the shock trade unionist elements coming towards us. Good revolutionaries, although still bad Marxists, but contributed a little to the clarification of that very revolutionary doctrine to which we wanted to lead them. Our organic centralism formula was precisely to say that not only is the party a particular organ of the class, but what is more, it is only when it exists that the class acts as a historical organism and not only as a statistical section that every bourgeois is ready to recognize. Okay, so are you trying to say that people who are in the party are more proletarian? That there has been a qualitative change in the character of members of the Communist Party compared to others. I'm somehow being reminded of Damon's critiques of organic centralism being ultimately synonymous with the party center being above and outside not only the party but the proletariat itself. Okay, let's see. Where was I? Marx, in the historically fundamental and irrevocable reconstruction of Lenin, not only says that he has not discovered the classes nor the struggle between classes, and indicates the dictatorship of the proletariat as the unmistakable connotation of his original theory. This means that only through the Communist Party can the proletariat reach its dictatorship. Mark, is this more the, oh yeah, the bourgeoisie recognize the existence of classes and therefore, it's not actually a Marxist theory? This is, no. Bourgeoisie recognize class as they engaged in class conflict with their feudal overlords, who did not allow them to achieve their class goals and so had to go to war with them internationally. The proletariat absolutely recognizes their own class interests and so on and so forth, right? Um, Marx did not discover the classes nor the struggle between the classes because other people discovered them first. He simply went in and went a step further and said class struggle is the engine of history itself. This goes beyond what Hegel was talking about and so on and so forth. Okay. Anyway. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time getting through this text for a lot of reasons, and I'm just feeling off today. I would have a much better critique of this if I was feeling better, but there's more I want to say. All right. Indicates the dictatorship of the proletariat as the unmistakable connotation of his original theory. This means that only through the Communist Party can the proletariat reach its dictatorship. The two notions, therefore, of party and class do not oppose each other numerically because the party is small and the class is large, but historically and organically. because only when within the class the energetic organ that is a party has been formed does the class become such and begins to perform the task assigned to it by our doctrine of history. Again, it's above and everybody else who is outside the party is not actually proletarian. And in fact, the party is outside of the proletariat, or rather, only because the party is the proletariat. Um, because only the people in the party are the proletariat. This is a tautology, by the way, a definitional tautology. They get to say that their party is in fact the proletariat. When it's like, no, the proletariat is in fact a class, and that class emerges out of its relation to the means of production and its role in social reproduction in a given society, right? Gosh, I don't even know if I want to write this down. Okay. Um 13. The substitution of the objective organic into place of democratic is not only motivated by the greater exactitude of a biological image compared to the faded image of an arithmetic nature. Sure, bro. But also by the solid need and political struggle to free ourselves from the notion of democracy. Knocking it down enabled us with Lenin to rebuild the Revolutionary International. Lenin's immortal theses at the First Congress are entitled Bourgeois Democracy and Proletarian Dictatorship. In theory, the antagonism of the two terms persists if, instead of bourgeois democracy, we speak of Leninist democracy in general, since Lenin is the one who showed how every bow before this ignoble fetish marks a victory of opportunism and counter-revolution. The whole text of the theses, which it would be superfluous to quote, the whole text of saying revolution, led to this result. If it is true that Lenin sometimes uses the term of proletarian democracy, this is for the sole purpose of demonstrating that this abstract point of arrival, in essence unreal because the proletariat with the classes annihilates itself, coincides with the full development of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the full requirement of a communist society. In the same spirit, the Manifesto for the Overwhelming Political Vigor said that the proletarian revolution made by the immense majority in the interest of the immense majority is the total victory of democracy. Yes, that is entirely correct. This is not an annihilation of the democratic lie. You guys just have an incredibly myopic understanding of democracy and understand it solely as bourgeois electoral democracy. You are the feudalists looking and saying, look how superior our system is to the ancient Greek democracy, whose ships went out twice and nearly caused the collapse of their system. Truly, we have the superior system. In the theoretical sense, as the central content of the manifesto. Oh gosh. Annihilation of the democratic lie, the central deception of bourgeois class ideology, Lenin's theses must be considered in their historical value. We refer only to Thesis 12, which stigmatizes the bankruptcy of the Bern Conference 1919 of the Socialist parties. Their proposal indicated by the complete failure of the. Okay, so they're trying to put Marx's manifesto in the same line as this section up here, where Marx is talking about um, what was it? Duty, law, truth, etc. They're trying to say that actually Marx wasn't really saying democracy when he said democracy in the manifesto, which he wrote and rewrote and published according to his actual straight out words, and then Engels continually in his multiple near dozen prefaces specifies, right? Uh, gosh, these people. Okay. Which stigmatizes the bankruptcy of the Bern Conference 1919 of the Socialist Parties. Their proposal indicated the complete failure of the theorists who defended democracy and failed to see its bourgeois character. Quote, this ludicrous attempt by the centrists of the German Independent Party to combine the Soviet system, i.e., proletarian dictatorship, with the National Assembly, i.e., bourgeois dictatorship, utterly exposes the paucity of thought of the yellow socialists and social democrats. Their reactionary pay bourgeois political outlook and their cowardly concessions the irresistibly growing strength of the new proletarian democracy. End quote. This passage shows in what sense the cause of the proletarian victory in the Civil War, the dictatorship of the proletariat could, in the political 1919, be indicated in order to defeat the traitors associating the terms of democracy and proletariat, according to the impeccable and rigorous line developed by Lenin. After a general victory in the field of theory had done justice to renegade social democrats, the communist left rightly proposed to abolish any use of the adjective democratic, both in reference to a future communist society, which will have no more people, mixture of different social classes. Fascinating. And no more power or state, and to the internal mechanism of our party, although it is right to say in theory that this party is a modern anticipation of the future society. Okay. If it's a modern anticipation of the future society, why is your party synonymous with having only why is your party made up of proletarians? I thought that you were the most proletarianized. I'm sorry, I'm being mean. I shouldn't. Okay. I'm being mean and vengeful for having to read through this shit for an hour and a half. The development of the history of the communist left, which is a task of our present movement, showed how already in degenerative phenomena that could be denounced in the years following Lenin's death, the very serious danger could be detected, arising from the excessive indulgence in admitting that our internal mechanism of organization should ape the electoral and parliamentary ones that the bourgeoisie had historically introduced, proclaiming them eternal. It was pointed out that the system of our international organization, culminating in Moscow congresses themselves, tolerated false methods in the selection of comrades for top tasks. It fell into solutions of a careeristic type of individuals who were perhaps brilliant, but also schemers, and who had managed to create a following of supporters comparable to the bourgeoisie's own electionist conventicles. In the beginning, these mistakes, if they were weaknesses, were not betrayals. Everyone in our movement believed that we were in a phase of a few years, after which a great final battle would take place. It was necessary to hurry, and everything was studied in order to accelerate the mobilization of the World Proletarian Army. Just as officers of the Tsar's army could be usefully used, so one could think of using champions and experts in the methodology of electoral and parliamentary careerism, so long as wise concessions were made to them and would not ruin the whole Revolutionary War campaign, as Marx had not ruined the whole inaugural address of 1864. On the other hand, the organizational criticisms of the left at the work of the International remain consistent with the demand that the concept of organicity in the distribution of functions within the movement should not be confused with the claim of freedom of thought and even less of a respect for elective and numerical democracy. Other oppositions, such as Trotskyist one, allow themselves to be seduced in the face of excesses of Stalin and Stalinism, clearly visible since 1924 to 26, by resorting to the argument of the violated internal democracy of the bureaucratic centers of the party and the International. To the left, to which we belong, while recognizing that in the name of Bolshevization there is a tendency to fossilize both the parties and the masses in an unconscious obedience, did not make the mistake of invoking more democracy and seeking the remedy in electoral consultations of the rank and file. Historically, the left actually had to accept it to measure itself in these little serious internal electoral struggles, but did not cease to consider as the worst evil of all that, of getting involved in any invocation of remedies that could be an aping of the bourgeois electoral carnival. I just want to say, in a classroom, when you're a little kid, right? Your teacher goes out and they say, I want you to fill in this little form here and vote for what activity we're going to do today. Is this act of organizational assent production aping the bourgeois electoral carnival? How about with your friends? You ask your friends, hey, what do you want to eat? And nobody can really agree, so you go and say, all right, we're going to make a list. Everybody like whatever it is that you want to go to. And then you do you don't do first past post, but you do multi-choice ranked choice voting, right? Or something along those lines. Is this aping the bourgeois electoral carnival? Is this evil to do this? Is it anti-communist to do some sort of election with your friends and your friend group? I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the organization of choice within a proletarian state is fundamentally distinct from the organization of choice, which is limited within the bourgeois system. I do not consider it to be aping the bourgeois system any more than the bourgeois system apes the Greek electoral system. It doesn't. The only way it apes it is in the fact that as a class, it's democracy for a particular class, which is removed from another class. That's the only basis on which it apes. Anyway. When the center of the International disavowed the center of the Italian Party in 1923, the latter withdrew in order to obey the principles of disciplined organization and willingly ceded the undesirable for true communist command posts to the right-wing and center minorities. Long afterwards, in 1924, at the clandestine conference in the Alps, the center held a consultation assuring Moscow of its victory. The federal representatives, not elected by its sections but designated by the center itself, the enormous majority, about 34 out of 40, voted for the theses of the left. The campaign made in the name of both internal democracy and sound Bolshevization had ostensible success only at the illegal Congress of Lyon in 1926, but only with the resource of calculating voters for the center, all those absent from the consultations held in Italy and under the fascist dictatorship. These historical precedents confirm that everywhere the mechanism of counting votes is always a fraud and a deception. No, they don't. In the society, in the class, or in the party, but the best resistance is offered by the Italian party precisely because its deep-rooted political tradition repudiated any homage, even the slightest, to deeds and mechanisms of historical democracy and the method of counting votes. 15. A long period has elapsed in the total decomposition of the Third International, with the painful demonstration that the tactical organizational deformations have resulted in the renegation of programmatic principles and in the subjection to the capitalist counter-revolution. Today, the effort to arrive with a hard and long work to the reconstruction of the unique International Communist Party, while based on a pre-present representation of the whole historical and theoretical perspective and on a balance sheet of all the tactical decisions put to test by history, can announce with total certainty, as concerns the internal organizational structure of the movement, that it must be considered ended forever, the time in which it could be minimally tolerated that in the organizational field of party elective forms and choice of managerial elements through such sterile consultations would survive. Having settled the great historical questions of theory and tactics by prolonging until today, the bridge that Lenin's time was thrown from Marx and Engels' manifesto to the Russian Revolution, The work will have to continue in revolutionary history with the irrevocable suppression in the life and dynamics of the party of any application of consultative or elective mechanisms based on the registered count of votes, in the place of which the new forms that respond to claim proclaimed since Moscow years of organic centralism for the Communist Party, the only author of the proletarian revolution, will develop. Okay, we'll take this, but let's see. Yeah, basically, the party should not use consultative or elective mechanisms based on the registered count of votes. So electoralism is not great, and it shouldn't be part of the party, according to this. Now, and the reasoning historically is that the counting of votes can be abused. And that's the principal one that they give in this, along with saying that, hey, when Marx talked about democracy, he was actually lying, and actually he meant for democracy to go away. This is a little sad. Frankly, it kind of reminds me of an abuse victim who's kind of been once burned, twice shy, sort of thing. Yeah, what happened in 1926 was horrible. What happened with Stalin going in and having votes done illegally in this line thesis, while the various people who would be able to fight against it were under threat of fascism, and then their votes just automatically went to the to Stalin's iteration. Yeah, that's shit. But you know, this is this is 1965. This is 40 years later, 41 years later. These historical precedents confirm that everywhere the mechanism of counting votes is always a fraud and deception. This doesn't carry over. And yes, ideally, we can make decisions as a massive whole and so on and so forth. And in your original conception, it said, hey, we can't hold democracy as a principle. Sometimes different organizational forms are superior to making decisions. Absolutely. 100 million% entirely correct. But you keep doubling down and doubling down to the point where you are removing Marx. You're going in and you're saying, hey, Marx is actually lying, and he actually meant the exact opposite when he said democracy. This is completely incorrect and has no place. Okay, with that said, that has been the 1965 notes for the theses on the question of organization. Thank you for attending the session today, everybody, and have a wonderful day.